That being said, I am very, very happy to have you here, my brother. I have the one and only Eyad Mubaied. He is going to be here to help us understand specifically why company cultures are very important and why they need to be structured the way they need to, based on the leadership of those leading the teams and the companies. So I'm happy to have you here. I think this is incredible. I'm very interested in this topic because I come from a design background, and at one point I was very interested in the cultural design of like Fortune 200 companies and Fortune 500 companies. But I want to say thank you for being here,
My
and I look forward to like learning from you and seeing how we can kind of take some of these practices and hopefully into some of these new entrepreneurial businesses as well.
Absolutely. I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So help us understand a little bit about yourself, right? We're going to do a deep dive about your background, but give the viewers a little bit of understanding of like who you are, what's your background, and I guess how did this whole passion for culture and leadership come about? Because you have an extensive amount of like corporate background. So yeah, help me share that story with the people.
I do. I was gonna say, if you really want a deep dive, you should talk to my wife about me. She'll know me a lot more than I know myself. So I grew up in the Middle East before,
Hmm.
born and grew up in the Middle East before coming to the US back in the mid late 90s. Growing up in the Middle East, I lived predominantly in the United Arab Emirates, so between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, before coming to the US to go to school. So I went to college in Connecticut. And then, long story short, I stayed, started working at KPMG. So my background is finance and accounting. Okay, so I'm a CPA by trade.
Hmm.
Then when I worked at KPMG, it was mostly in the audit arena. So KPMG is a big, just for the audience who might not know it. So it's a big CPA firm. They call them now, one of the big four. So when I started working there, it was accounting, on auditing, and then spent really my time on mostly manufacturing types of clients. Okay. And mostly in audit, I did a little bit of tax rotations and I did some consulting, but mostly in audit. I spent about 16 years there in Connecticut. And then I came
Oh
down
wow.
to be an executive at an aerospace and defense company, fairly large company, publicly
Hmm.
traded. Had at first about 20 25,000 employees, and then grew up 50,000 through acquisitions, etc. My boss was the chief accounting officer, their boss CFO, their boss is the CEO. And really throughout time in my career, I've always been fascinated with just cultures, and ignore organizational, just overall cultures. Different food, different style, different dancing, different folklore, different buildings. My parents used to take us in the UAE. It's really really hot in the summer, so we used to
Hmm.
take us on summer trips in other parts of the world. So like I went to Europe numerous times, and then when I came to the US, again, culture, Connecticut, significantly different culture in Florida, significantly different than the
Yes,
UAE. So
100%.
always all along just loved the idea of cultures,
Hmm.
organizational and otherwise, and always really wondered, well, why there are some organizations cultures that are great, some are not, some even within the same organization, sub organizations might be great, and some might not. And during the time that I was at one of the companies, I was looking at this PowerPoint presentation, and really it didn't have the word culture on it. It
Hmm.
had nothing that has to do with anything with culture. But all of a sudden, I was looking at it, and then popped in my head, kind of like the Beautiful Mind, movie where, like, numbers and letters start to move.
Yeah.
It's undiagnosed, by the way. But
Okay.
something popped up in my mind, and it was what I call in my book, that I wrote, and I'll talk about that in a second. The culture creation model. I call it the secret recipe of how to create your desired organizational culture. So, anyways, and I applied it after I did that on everything, like the grocery store, companies, me, myself, at home, any other organizations that I was involved in. And the more I applied it, the more it kind of worked. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. But then back in November of 23, found myself one of multiple thousands of people that got laid off. And at the end of December of 23, one of my friends said, "Hey, yeah, do you have fascinating stories? Why don't you write a book about it?" And I said, I'm a CPA finance person. I don't write books, right? So he said, no, so that you just remember the stories. So I
Mm,
said, okay, well, that's a good idea. So I went back home and I was like, well, what am I gonna write about that might be of interest to the world? And I was like, well,
right.
obviously the culture creation model that I created, right? And then I was like, well, okay, well, that's one page. And then I was like, well, what about the other 99 pages or
Yeah, I'm about
100?
to say the other 300 something.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And at that point, I knew it had to be at least 100 pages, looking at doing a little bit of research. And then, anyways, So I was like, yeah, here's the table of contents. So I started writing the table of contents, and his challenge to me was 1,000 words a day. And between stock comp and like, severance and bonuses and all that stuff, we had enough cash for a few months, right? So I was like, oh, okay, well, here's what I'll do. I'll start, writing the book. So I'll break my day into thirds, third writing the book, third looking for a finance job, and a third doing whatever my wife wants me to do around the house that we've neglected for 8 years, right? Since we moved to Florida. So and I accepted the challenge with my friend, and his challenge was 1,000 words a day, and I accepted that. Sent I wrote 1,000 words that day, and I sent him a picture, and I was like, challenge
Hmm.
accepted. And really, all along, just not even thinking that I would be writing a book and publishing it and opening a company. It really just to
Yeah.
remember the stories that I've been telling him. And he's a good friend. He's a leadership coach, and I'll tell you why in a minute why I
Hmm.
mentioned that. Anyways, and then, time passes, January passes, and doing interviews, writing the book, whatever, and nothing with the interviews and finance. And it was baffling all my recruiters. Nothing was working, right? Like, especially if it's 16 years at KPMG, Big Four,
Correct.
executive experience at a publicly traded company doing multiple things and multiple projects and all
Yeah,
that.
that's
They were
value.
like, oh, you're gonna get a job in a month or two. Nothing was working. So, anyways, long story short, in early February of I look up and I had 45,000 words, and I was like, well, maybe this is publishable. So I
Yeah.
connect with my wife's aunt who's a ghostwriter, and I say, hey, how long is it going to take? How
Hmm.
much money is it going to cost? And more importantly, tell me if there's something here. And she said, yeah, here's how long is it going to take? And I was like, no, no, that's too long. I don't have enough cash. So let's backtrack a little
Gotta
bit.
speed this.
And here's how much. I was like, I'll pay you more, finish it quicker. And then she's like, yeah, most importantly, I'm looking at this book and I'm saying, oh my gosh, this is opening my eyes to why this organization's culture wasn't
Hmm.
good, or this one was good, or that leader wasn't doing a good job, or this leader was doing a good job. And it's just the basic steps of how to create your organization culture. So she's like, it just not coming from an organizational psychologist, which by the way would be the career path for whoever it is that's going to end up writing a book like mine, is
Yeah.
organizational. And it happened also at the same time. Within the same month, I stumbled upon one of my newly found friends, and he's like, "You writing a book?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What is it about?" So I told him, and he's like, "Oh, I'm an organizational psychologist." And I was like, "Can you be one of my beta readers, please?" He said, "Absolutely." So I sent him a couple of chapters, and then he comes back and he says, "Yeah, I like this stuff more than my textbooks from college. It makes it much more clear, and anybody can follow this versus like the complicated thousands and
Of
diagrams and
course.
whatever, right?" But anyway, so I went through, and that was kind of a confirmation that we're on the right path. So continued to be doing interviews in finance and accounting, but then writing the book, opening the company. Long story short, went back and to a company which is where my friend was licensed or certified. It's called Giant, so it's a
Hmm.
leadership development coaching, and I got my certification there and basically opened up Cultivate Culture, launched it, published the book in April, and then a couple months, of course, passed by before you know what the heck is going on. Some could argue I still don't, but you know what's going on. So really been in business for about 6 months since then. So long story short, the reason of why I opened it just happened. It just was the door
Correct.
that I kept on going through. All other doors were closing, and this door was just that path was just kept on opening. So I kept going to it.
That's one. I'm gonna give you your flowers now if nobody's ever given you your flowers before.
Thank you.
Because that's incredible, right? I mean, that's such a long journey in a couple different industries to then this door that you didn't really know about just being there. And you're like the curiosity part, right? Oftentimes you hear like curiosity kills the cat. It's like, well, not really. Sometimes curiosity can help you to be courageous enough to step into a whole different field and purpose that life actually has for you.
Without courage, you'll never innovate. I mean, that's the idea, right? So,
Correct. Well,
yeah.
and it's interesting because a lot of stuff that we do like with the business is helping people turn their skill sets and knowledge, passions or interests into like a profitable and scalable, basically info product, right? But I say that to say you had so much experience and knowledge in a field, something drastic happened, and you thought, hey, cool, I should be able to just jump back into another opportunity because of all this time. But we live in a world now where sometimes that doesn't happen. It doesn't matter how much experience you've had in a well-known company, held certain roles. it really goes into you leaning in all aspects from your curiosity, from those passions, those interests, being open to whatever doors do come about, and just leaning forward into those and kind of, I won't say stumbling your way down the hall, right? But sometimes that's what it feels like for a lot of people. It's like, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing. And if I'm being honest, do we ever really know what we're kind of doing? I don't know what I'm doing, but what I'm going to do is just do something and push forward and utilize the skills or the experience I've had on these next adventures and just fail forward. And that's like the concept, or at least what I'm hearing is what you did, and just being open to where it's like, hey, I could have said
Exactly.
no, I'm not a writer or I'm not an author, but you're like, I do have knowledge. At least let me just do this thing that somebody's
Yeah,
telling
yeah,
me to do,
exactly. Like
right?
I wasn't prepped to say this, but it was like Frozen 2 movie, right, with Anna and Elsa. Like, sometimes you get the most wisest thing ever from just children's movies. But anyways,
Yeah.
it's like, well, what am I going to do? Well, the next right thing, right? And it's like,
Yes.
okay, well, the next right thing and the next right thing. And it's just one thing led to the other. And then I joined the local chambers of commerce. And then I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, well, some people are interested in culture. And then, okay, here's my first client. Oh, here's my second client. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
now people are calling me. And then somebody, his name is Jay, calls me for, a podcast. And it's like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I guess I'll just keep going, right? Keep
Yes.
going.
That's one of the most his name's I think it's Myron Golden, and he talked about the idea of like your circumstances. And if you look at your circumstances, typically what you're looking at is like your circumference, right? Well, if you're standing in the same spot, yeah, nothing's going to change because you're still in that same surrounding. But if you take action and you move out of your current circumstance, where you're no longer in that environment, things are bound to happen, right? So kind of for what you're talking about, you're like, wait, I ended up running into someone who's in the same similar field that can be a beta tester or beta reader for what I'm looking to do. And the part of that is because you're taking action, the world is bringing you the opportunities because it
You
sees
got,
that you're moving in that direction.
you
And
got
I've
it.
experienced that in myself, but every time I come across somebody who's doing something new, they're like, yeah, it just felt like it came out of nowhere. It's like, no, 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 no. You're pushing an alignment to a direction, and the world's now supporting you to
Yeah.
get to that part,
Yeah,
right?
because that divine intervention or otherwise might lead you a certain way, but if you're not willing to be
Yeah.
led a certain way, it's not gonna, you're not gonna have courage, therefore it's not gonna work. So you might fail. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
whole idea of innovation is you gotta be ready to fail, otherwise you'll
Hmm.
never innovate, right? But anyways,
Correct. Yeah, no, I do love that. And one of the things that's helped me change my perspective is in tests and experiments, yes, you're looking for a particular type of outcome, but what you're doing is just trial and error. Like you're literally testing it. You're just looking to see,
engineers do. That's what Elon Musk
yeah, I just want to see
exactly
what
why he
happens out of it.
succeeded. You got
Correct.
it.
I'm like, I don't want, like, yeah, we're aiming to a specific goal, but in the moment, I just want to see what happens. I'm not even looking at a particular outcome. When I get the outcome, now I can interpret the data and then adjust it as well. And I think if people took more of that kind of approach versus like, I need this to work this particular way in order to make it,
I don't know, we're
right?
going way off script, not that we had a script, but like even when you look at Amazon as an example,
Yeah.
Amazon, their tolerance for error is both 99% and 0%.
Mm-hmm.
It depends. If they're gonna go create a new, cell phone or, establish a new rocket or like whatever it is, their tolerance for error is extremely high. They'll let you go, you'll go innovate. But let's say the subject matter or the process they're trying to get into is opening a new warehouse that they've done a million times. Their
Mm-hmm.
tolerance for error is close to zero, right? So it's facts and circumstances, but the idea of innovation is you have to try something that hasn't been tried before, and therefore you need to be willing to fail and then
Correct.
learn from it. Exactly.
Yeah.
I
So
wholeheartedly agree.
the reason I say that is I would love to dive into kind of how you've been able to methodically, I can't say the word, but basically come up with a system or practice and methods to help people curate or articulate their culture and their organizations and with the leadership. But before we even do that, most people hear the word culture, and I think I'm not saying they probably have a preconceived like understanding of what it is. Help us understand specifically what does even culture mean,
Yeah,
and
that's
then how
that's a
does it?
great question. That's a great question. So, and I write about this, by the way, the name of my book is The Culture-Driven Organization, and then the subtitle is How to Create Your Desired Organizational Culture and Sustain It. Okay. So when I wrote the book and I started doing some research, and it was quick. It was the whole thing was written within a month and then edited within a month, and then we were ready to launch it. The word culture, its Latin term is colere. Okay. And the way you kind of look at the definition is to tend to, or to grow, or to cultivate. So technically, the name of my company, Cultivate Culture, is really two words of the same exact root
It's
Latin
like
word.
chai tea. It's like
Yeah,
technically it
exactly.
makes
Well, that's the same thing. Try this tea in different language.
yeah.
So it's a cultivate culture. Okay, well, culture is cultivation. So whatever. So the idea is that active growing and almost like a plant related, and that's why the picture on the front of the book is hands with a seedling that's coming up. So that's what culture is. When you look at the definition in Merriam-Webster, all what it talks about is the way of life for a group of people in the same time and place, right? Like it
Hmm.
can't be different time, different place, and or it's just, and that's how you then bring them together as an organization. That's why the name of the book is the culture driven organization, not the culture driven company, right? Because the
Mm.
idea when I wrote the book is it really doesn't matter. It can be applied to a not for profit, can be
Hmm.
applied for profit. It could be applied to a country because that's an organization to some extent. It could be applied to you as a person. You're an organism.
Hmm.
So that's the definition of it. The way I define it in the book, specifically to organizational culture, is the manifestation of the shared beliefs
Mm.
reflected in common behaviors. Okay, so the idea is, and you can even look into the definition and the Latin word and even Merriam-Webster, and you'll be like, oh, okay, well, this kind of makes sense. So there is certain shared beliefs, so it could be your
Hmm.
heart, could be your brain, that then gets manifested through shared or common behavior. Because if you don't have a behavior that's common, then it's hard to say that you have a unified, at least culture. I mean, you still end up with a
Yeah.
culture, but it's not necessarily as unified, right?
Right.
So the manifestation of the shared beliefs reflected in common behavior, and I'll give more examples in a minute, but that's how I define culture.
Gotcha. I love how you've defined it because I feel that there's a lot of misconceptions, which I would love for you to share, like what's maybe like one or two common misconceptions when people say like, oh yeah, our company or our organization has culture, or like we're a cultured organization. And you're like, are you really? Or are you just a gathering of people who are doing something? Like, what are
Yep.
those like one or two misconceptions when people think that they have culture or they're
Yeah,
trying
certainly.
to
And
include
I thought
culture?
of three or four, and you can stop me whenever you
Oh,
think the
you can
time
list
is too much.
10 of them if you want.
So there's a bunch of them, but the
Yeah.
one of the main ones that I tell people is really definition. So if I make it, and I love analogies, so you'll hear me talk a lot about just different analogies to break down very
I love
complex
it.
truth into simple manners. So think of, and I live in Florida, so think of a mango
Hmm.
tree. People confuse the fruit of culture with culture. So a mango tree, people when they define the mango tree, it sounds odd to define it as the mangoes. I mean, the mango is the result of the tree,
Correct.
inclusive of the tree. At some point, it will be taken out and utilized by whoever's the customer of the tree
Yeah.
or the tree is trying to serve. But the idea of sometimes misconceptions and people confuse is the difference between the mangoes versus the tree. I think of culture as the totality of the entirety of the process. Again, remember the definition in even the Latin word and in
Yeah.
Merriam-Webster. It's the manifestation of shared beliefs reflected in common behavior. So it's not just the common behavior, the fruit that is the culture. That's the
Hmm.
fruit of your culture, but it's not necessarily the culture. So when people talk about culture, they confuse the fruit from the root from, and they just basically say culture is just one aspect of the whole tree. No, 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 the whole tree, inclusive of the fruit,
Right.
is your culture. And so I'll define the culture creation model. I
Okay.
call it the secret recipe in the book. So, how would you, as a leader, if you're a good leader and want a good culture that follows, your shared beliefs or the beliefs that you have as a leader, well, how do you go by it? And that's the whole idea of the
Yeah.
book, is the engineering almost process, step by step. And I'll explain more about the story. But how do you go define or even create the culture you desire. I put it in a diagram and I call it a culture creation model. And here's how it looks like. So I'll use my hands and I'll explain it, but hopefully you can put it
Okay.
up on the screen when you replay this. So think of the center. So there are three circles with the
Hmm.
core of those circles. The center is what I call philosophies.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you go one step larger and you call it process, and then one step larger and you call it people, like
Hmm.
your people in the organization. Like it could be employees, it could be, if people are volunteering or whatever. It's basically your hands, arms, and feet of your organization. So that's what I call people. And when you decide what your philosophies are as a leader, then you go integrate them in a process, then go instill them in your people to follow. When these three circles align together strategically or on purpose, basically,
Right.
then you will have the culture you desire. Why? Because if the definition of culture is the manifestation of shared beliefs, that's your philosophies, into common behaviors, which is the behavior of your people, then the individuals outside of the circle, what they see is the common behavior or the fruit
Hmm.
of that tree. But really, that fruit didn't just come from nowhere. It's not by itself there, self-evident. It's coming from a process, and that process is coming from a certain philosophies. And philosophies are like
Right.
your vision, mission, values, all kinds of core values
Yeah.
and otherwise. And then processes, like just your normal process, your HR process, your AP process, your finance process, your order to cash, your procurement, your vendors, your
Hmm.
engineering, your marketing, whatever. These processes don't exist in a vacuum and no reason. They hopefully come from certain philosophies, vision, mission, values, and otherwise, that the leaders then go and integrate in a process. And once you integrate it in a process, your people will follow. I mean, and if they don't, there's all other kinds of ramification, but they'll follow that process. And when those three are aligned,
Hmm.
then you have that culture that you desire. Because if it's the manifestation of shared beliefs reflected in common behaviors, as the definition says, then that shared beliefs is your philosophies put in a process, put in your people, three things align, voila, you have your desired culture. Okay. So really the biggest misconception is, how do you even define it? Because people just
Yeah.
confuse it. They talk about like culture fit and culture add
Correct.
and all kinds of language, and sometimes they call the process and the vision and from your culture, then your people. It's like, no, no, no. This whole thing
Correct.
is culture from beginning to the end. So that's one misconception.
That's one misconception. Wow, there was so many nuggets in there, and that was one.
That's the first
Okay.
misconception. So if you want the second, let me know. I'll jump in and I'll
Yeah,
do it.
let's go ahead and do two. That's wow. And I got because even from there, don't forget your second one. Because even from there, what I'm thinking is right. I might be butchering this, but I remember hearing this concept of like first knowledge, right? And what that to a degree means, say for instance, I was explaining to people back in like the early, I think 1900s, maybe early 1900s, that hey, if you invested into Bitcoin at this time, you'll become a millionaire, right?
Mhm.
If you invest in Bitcoin on the internet at this time, you'll be a millionaire. And they were like, cool. Well, at that time, they won't even know what Bitcoin is. It's like, we need to first explain to them what is the internet, right? Like, we got to get to the first part before we can even talk about Bitcoin or investing on the internet, right? And that's
And
what I'm
you're
hearing from
right.
you.
If you can't define it, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, you can't
Correct.
continuously improve it and change it. So it's part of the problem is people cannot even fix their culture because they don't even know what
That's what
culture
was
is.
exactly.
And that's exactly what you're trying to say. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, and listening to your, I don't want to not mispronounce it, but like say it wrong. Is it like a mechanism? Is it
Yeah,
methodology?
it's
How
the
do
model, the culture
the
creation
model?
model is what I call it.
So the model is like stemming from the philosophy. Now, from that philosophy, I think it's interesting because I believe as like a company grows, maybe that changes over time, or at least that's what I've heard. Once you hit certain levels of employees, the culture has to change because of how big this organism is, right?
Well,
But with that,
it depends,
huh?
but again, take that as an example of the definition. So, if
Mm,
culture is the manifestation of shared beliefs, i.e., philosophies that go in process, go in people, and the outside customer, let's say, or stakeholders see that behavior,
mm-hmm.
you could be a Amazon Bezos with one employee, one, okay,
Yeah.
have the same customer-centric culture as you are Amazon 300,000 employees, or whatever the number
Mm-hmm.
is, right? The idea is your process will change. Like you
Okay.
might close your books on an abacus when you're an employee of one, and then when
Yeah.
you're 10, it's Excel, and then when you're 10,000, it's SAP. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your culture is changing
Mm.
because it's stemming from the same philosophy through a different process, but the process principles are still the same. You're just maturing as you grow up as a
Okay.
company, size, quality, or otherwise, or both. But you're still, the culture is, or the fruit of the culture,
Mm-hmm.
still customer centric, you're still innovative, you're still excellent, you still serve each other, you still have integrity and ethics at the highest level above all. You still. So so your employee, when they are dealing with you, when you're a company of one, could exactly have the same feeling as if you're a company of 10,000, because a mango tree, when it has one piece of mango on it, because it's still small, will taste
Mm-hmm.
as juicy as when you have a mango tree that has 100 mangoes. Well, why?
Correct.
Well, because it's the same culture, but the process and the
Okay.
tools are a little different, but it doesn't matter because you still have. So just because a company is growing doesn't necessarily mean that the culture has to change. Now you're maturing, but
Yeah.
you're not necessarily changing the culture. See what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I was curious about that, and I think one of the things we can also talk about is culture is driven by quote unquote the leaders. Or what's your thoughts on that when
That's
it's
actually the second, that leads us good to the second misconception.
misconception? Okay, perfect.
So many times people, and I agree, culture has to be driven by the leaders, because even when you go
Hmm.
back and you look at the model, your philosophies are coming from your leaders. They're the ones, the leaders are the ones that are going to go and design the process. Like if you're the CFO, you're the one picking which finance, which, if you have an accrual method or cash method. If you're the legal person, you're picking what attorneys and what kind of contracts you have. If you're, the IT person, you're going to pick which, system are you going to use. So there is design in the process that only the leaders, and depending on how big the company is and what level of leaders, but the idea is it's not just your normal, individual contributor or follower, as I call them in the book. They're not the ones making the decisions on the design. They follow the design process. But the idea is the leaders are going to be making all those decisions, but there is a huge difference between leadership
Hmm.
and culture. So even when I went and started writing the book back in January of last year,
Hmm.
I was like, I can't be the only one who's thinking about this. So I went on Amazon and I said, hey, best culture creation type of books, and a couple came up and I bought them, and they came in and they were all about the fruit, i.e. the culture trait,
Correct.
and about the leader, and nothing that bridges the two. Well, if you have a
The
leader who
gap.
knows what culture fruit they want, well, what's my systematic approach? Day one, I do this. Day two, I do that. Day three, I do that. And that's
Hmm.
when one of the confirming factors for me that opened my eyes is like, oh my gosh, yes, this is transformational, is confusion between leadership and culture. So leadership is the behavior of the leader. So it's, to some extent, it's your own personal culture, okay?
Okay.
Because there's other people around you that you serve or that come in contact with you
Okay.
that see
Yeah.
your manifestation of your beliefs reflected in your common behavior. So leadership is the behavior of the leader. Culture is the whole process inclusive of the behaviors of the leader, but also of all of the other members of the organization.
Correct.
So there is a big difference between leadership and culture. So I think of culture as having two sides of one coin, of the same coin.
Hmm.
You have the leadership side, and then you have the culture creation model process side. Because it's likely that if you have a bad leader, whatever that is defined as,
Yeah.
whatever, then it's very unlikely that you have a good or favorable culture. Like it's likely that you'll end up with the bad culture. But
Correct.
just because you have a good leader, and especially as the company grows, you don't necessarily end up with a good culture. And I've
Hmm.
seen that throughout my career. There's many leaders that were awesome, but then they just can't figure out how to push that manifestation of shared beliefs through the process into their people for their people to follow.
Hmm.
So if you want a good culture, you have to deal with both sides of the coin, the leadership side, but also the culture creation model side. That's why when I created the company and after writing the book and launching it, I was like, well, the book is half the coin, which is the
Right.
process. I need to get, because I'm accounting and finance, CPA, I need to go get certified to be a coach, right?
Yeah.
And lead. So when I come as an offering to any organization, I bring both to the table, and I know we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's the second misconception is people confuse leadership and culture. You can definitely have a good leader, but
Hmm.
not as good of a culture because they are not following that process that the book
Right.
talks. Uh,
With that said, you don't have to do like details, names, or anything, but could you like give an example of a time where you've witnessed that and coming in to like restructure or have these conversations and you've seen the transformation of a culture and why, like, what happened or what was the cause of that culture not being there in the first place? And then what steps were taken throughout that process to help them to actually transform the organization as a
I mean,
whole?
I've seen in my life multiple situations where, especially as the organization gets larger, there's this magic number of 12. All statisticians tell you when, you can't
Hmm.
herd. It's easy to herd a group of 12 or less, but once it goes over 12, it's just significantly goes up above the difficulty of doing that. But I've
Hmm.
seen it many times where you have good leaders. It's just now, or a ultimate leader who wants a certain philosophy. I mean, I worked with a company where one of the chiefs had a certain philosophy, and he was new, and one of their direct reports had a different philosophy and what is acceptable and what's not. And after a while, the chief let this person go, right?
Yeah.
Because that person is going to now become their ambassador, the chief's ambassador, down to whatever it is that the conversation or the topic that they're going through and
Hmm.
that person was assigned. They just had a major disagreement in philosophy,
Yeah.
so they had to let him go. And if you didn't, then the process is going to continue to be designed by that person whose philosophy is not as good as the chief wanted it to be. And
Hmm.
it made sense that that person goes. So I mean,
Gotcha.
I've seen it numerous times where if you have the wrong leaders, I mean, your culture cannot be affected. Even if the top person is perfect, doesn't exist, but even if they're perfect, they can't. I mean, if you're 100 employee, okay, well, maybe you'll rub shoulders with them. But if you're 1,000 employee, 10,000, 100,000, I
Hmm.
mean, that CEO is not gonna meet each and every person. They
But
have to
yeah,
rely
no.
on that process and the leadership in between.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does. And I think that's what I admired when you were explaining it earlier about the other books and being able to identify that gap, which is that systematic approach that can be replicated but just followed in order to create
And it's
that
yeah, it's not
I think that's
easy.
beautiful.
Deloitte put a study out, I think it was 3 years ago, where they asked executives and said, "What's the most essential thing for you as an organization to achieve your objectives?" And 94% came back and said, "Culture." Okay, so culture is very essential to achieving our objectives, which is not a staggering. I mean, like, okay, well, everybody knows that culture is so important. Like, well, what's so new yet? The staggering statistic is only 36% of those 94% claim they have the culture they desire. Okay, so if almost essentially 100% of executives believe the culture is so essential, why only a third have the
Yeah.
culture they desire? I think maybe a third just don't care. Like
Mm.
they just they're gonna come in, they're gonna do their M&A, they're gonna do whatever it is, they're gonna, the stock is gonna go up, they're gonna do some form of a strategy transaction, etc., and they're gone in 3 years. And culture takes, depending on how big the company is, it could go from three
Correct.
months to 3 years or 4 years. And why would they sow anything in the field that somebody else is gonna reap, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. So they don't focus on it. But I think there is a third. Now, again, this is not necessarily a study that I did, but just a feeling.
It's a
I
right.
feel that there's about a third who just simply don't know how. They just don't. And that's where the culture creation comes in. Because if we, as an industry of culture cultivators, only focus on leadership, but don't really focus on the other side of the coin, I think we're missing
Right.
something. And that's the gap you were talking about.
Yeah. It's funny because what you said made me think of a coaching call that I was on from a mentor, and he was referencing a guy that he was teaching, and he was like, "You can't say your one of your principles is that, being healthy, but one, you're out of shape, two, you're eating bad." Right? So like there's a disconnect. You can't
Is
say
it
you
is it
yeah.
philosophy because you're saying that you want healthy? Then if the behavior doesn't follow the philosophy, something is wrong with the process.
Hmm.
Unless your philosophy, you're saying you're healthy, you say you're ethical as a company or an organization, you say you respect people, you say customer first, but you really don't mean it, so you didn't go and put a process together to follow that, then okay, the root cause now, and that's one of the great things about this model, the culture
Hmm.
creation model, is it helps you as a leader assess the root cause of why that behavior is not following what you need. Many times most leaders go to the people and say, people must be the problem. Let's fire them. Okay. If you go deeper into the process and change the process so that people can follow that process, but I
Yeah.
can tell you rarely leaders go into philosophies because that's where really the rubber meets the road. That's when sometimes the conversations become like uncomfortable
Yeah.
when
It's
you
like
are
a
in
checking
that
them in a
philosophy.
way.
You got
Yeah, no, I'm saying I feel like I could see that happening to where those because there's another podcast that I was on with a gentleman, Tom, and he is in the same similar field, but he was working with the C-suite. He had the CEO basically doing some stuff on the ground, and that was just a part of the process. And then basically she didn't really like that. She did it, but she didn't like it, made him not come back anymore. But to say that where you have this person who's teaching and training your staff to help them to improve, to become better, but you're not willing to do the same thing to become better, like it's not making sense, right?
You
So
can't
then
you can't
when
preach
you're
and on your core value, respect, and you as a CEO walking around and yelling and screaming and swearing at your people.
correct,
Okay. Well, you can put it on the wall, but people will see through
see
that
that.
and they'll not ever do anything. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's just they're not going to be motivated. Their engagement is going to be too low. And I can give you the third misconception since we're talking about engagement if
Yep.
you're interested.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Let's
Listen,
go for it.
open book. Open book.
To employee engagement. Okay.
Okay.
And just for the audience so that they know that that's a usually a quantified metric from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, depending on how you want to look at it, or 5 stars or 10 stars, whatever. That basically portrays how engaged, how all in, how inspired, how really continuously working as hard as they can your employees. So it's employee engagement is a very well-known metric, around in the whole world. Okay. Some of the misconception and the confusion that I see between employee engagement and culture is which one leads to which. Does
Chicken or
culture
egg.
lead to employee engagement or does employee engagement lead to culture? Okay. And the way I think about it and the way I wrap my head around it, and then it's extremely important. Like when you look at the importance of employee engagement to any organization, I'll give you an example. I think it was Gallup did a recent study. And for every 10%, let's say it's a 1 through 100, for
Mm-hmm.
every 10% increase in employee engagement, the market cap, market value of your organization or your company will increase 4% for every 10%.
Oh, wow.
Recently, Gallup, I think it was last week, they came out with the current state of the US employee engagement, and it's at 31%.
Mm-hmm.
A good cultured company is 80% typically.
Okay.
So just do the math between the 30% and the 80%. So if you're in a good culture company and an average, not even a bad, just an average culture
Average.
company at 30, that's 50% difference times, for every 10 is 4. That's 20% difference in market cap between a good average or a good company's culture versus
Mm-hmm.
one that is just average. And even if you go down, that's even more, right?
Yeah.
So employee engagement is extremely, essentially important to any organization. But the way I think about it, and this is why I bring it up because it's so important,
Mm-hmm.
which one leads to which? Is it
Yeah.
culture leads to engagement or engagement leads to culture? So the way I think about it, if culture is the manifestation of shared beliefs reflected in common behavior, then depending on who's seeing the common behavior, I think typically there is an internal culture. how employees deal with each other, how the system is set up, how the process, what are the policies, etc., all lead to the culture or the behavior of internally the employees with each other. That then becomes your internal culture, and it leads to the employee engagement. So if your internal culture is toxic, regardless of what people see on the outside, if your internal culture is not as good as it should, then that's going to affect your employee engagement among each other internally. But then when you take the employee engagement, which is a result of the internal culture, then that will now reflect outside of the organization, and the culture seen on the outside now is affected as a result of employee engagement. So at its core, no pun intended, employee engagement is a result of culture. It's not the other way around. So when people say, and the reason I mentioned that is when people say, well, if I fix my employee engagement, then my culture gets better. Well, employee engagement is the result of your culture. You can't fix the end result to go
Correct.
to, you can't fix the cause by the end result. Like, you got to go fix the culture internally, then
Okay.
that will now affect your employee engagement, and it's going to follow. So again, it's all about the definition, and
Yeah,
because unless you define it and you know exactly how it's done, you will have a hard time fixing it, because you're going to think
correct.
that you need to fix employee, or you're going to fix employee engagement so that your culture is fixed. No, 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 no. Fix your culture. Then your
Correct.
employee engagement is going to get fixed. You
This
see
is
what I mean?
Yeah, so this is perfect because then this kind of leads into my next question, right? Say I come to you and I'm saying, hey, I need help. I need to like, what's
Mm.
the first thing we're basically assessing, or what's the first step to getting this ship in order?
Yeah, I'm going to give you two things, because the first one might be a surprise to you. Maybe it's not. So I'll give you two
Okay.
things. Okay. So the first thing I do, and that's not even an assessment that I do in any written form or even asking questions to
Yeah.
assess it. Humility is the first thing
Hmm.
that I try to get. Okay.
Is that with a company or is that with like the
With the
leader
leader.
itself? The
With the
leader.
leader.
Okay.
And then it depends on where the leader is. So if the
Yeah.
CEO, the top guy or gal calling me, okay, well, they're the ones I'm going to assess. If the CFO, COO gives me a call, well, I need to figure out what the CEO is thinking, right? But the
Hmm.
idea of humility is this: unless you are humble enough, and you don't have to be like humble to a point where it's like you're the most humble person in history. No, that's not the point. But
Yeah.
you're humble enough to say that, oh, well, if culture needs transformation, and it's two sides of one coin, the leader could be the issue.
Yeah.
And are you willing to be humble enough for, yeah, to come in and start asking you questions about things that you might have to change as a leader, right?
Hmm.
Because if philosophies is the core of culture, or what I call it, the soul of culture is philosophy, then those philosophies are in the minds of the leaders and the hearts of the leaders and their behavior, right? So, and that's where leadership comes. It's the behavior of the leader. So that's one half that I try to assess before I even start to think through, am I, how bad is the culture, yada yada. Because if at the end of the day the leader is not humble enough to change, then it's not gonna work. So that's kind of like my hidden assessment that I do.
Right.
I don't tell them anything,
Makes
and I just
sense.
try to assess
Yeah.
it. Now, part of it is when they come and say, "Yeah, I need help." That's by itself is humble enough, right?
Indicates. Correct. Yeah.
They're telling you that they don't like something. And then the second one is the normal assessment. So based on the philosophies, process, and people, I assess where are you, and if I think the problem is a leadership one, well, I can give you leadership development. If I think the problem is the culture creation model, and you don't really have a process to that you're going through culture transformation, well, I'll give you some services here, or it could be a combination of both. So that's how I usually tackle it.
Got you. Okay. And obviously, like, this isn't just like a one-off thing, right? So the question I have is how do people ensure that this new development of culture isn't just a one-time, hey, we're good to go for the next 50 years versus, hey, this might need to be a continuous thermostat, like readjustment and realignment to instill that we keep that I won't say balance, but that harmonious, alignment to what we're really
It's the
gonna.
question of sustainment. So the
Yes.
last chapter in my book, and I call it Sustainment, is the name of it, because after you go create it, you're gonna have to go sustain it. But see, the interesting thing, and I was writing as I was writing the book and just thinking and through this and studying it, if we go back to the analogies of the mango tree, I mean, what are
Hmm.
the things that you need to create a culture, i.e., mango tree? I mean, it's water, it's good dirt, it's sun, it's whatever other things that it's air, whatever other things that you need, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same things when you create it that made you have that created culture is going to be the
Hmm.
one that's going to continue to sustain it.
Correct.
If you focused on philosophies on day one to create your culture, well, you're going to continue to focus on philosophies.
Hmm.
If you created it for a certain in a process, and in the book I split process between process principles and process tools. Well, the tools might get a little different, but your principles
Yeah.
are the same. So that's just going to continue the same way that you measured culture before, whatever the way that you do it. And if we have time, we'll go into it.
Hmm.
Then you'll continue to measure it, right? Because
Right.
it's culture by definition is a living thing. So whatever is
Hmm.
keeping you alive when you create it is going to keep you alive later on. There might be some, differences, but for the most part, I think that's what sustains it. It's whatever got you to be able to create it and say, I'm good at a certain point is going to be what gets you going, in my view.
Okay. And how would someone be able to, right? Each organization has their own, speaking of kind of living, breathing thing, they have their own unique DNA, right? What are like a quick like way for someone to be able to assess or even start to question, hey, what is our DNA for our organization culture? Like, what
Yeah,
should they look at? I know it's the philosophy, right? That's the philosophy, the process, the people, but like, is it internal questions that they have to ask themselves first, or what does that look like?
absolutely. I mean, that's hey, depends on how much time and resources and other things that they're willing to do.
Yeah,
Honestly, it's just by the book. At the end of the book, I have an assessment, and you can kind of go
perfect.
online and see it on my website too. That assessment is like a 30, 40, different questions
Hmm.
would apply, I think, to any organization of any size in any industry in any continent in the world because it's the same culture creation model. I think it was the same 1,000 years ago, same today, same 1,000 years from now. Then they can take those questions and it becomes the foundation of culture. But then because culture is different from a company
Hmm.
to another, from a country to another, a town to another, industry to another, those 40 or so questions that I created and included in the book are only the foundation. Then you'll have to, as you understand the culture creation model, as you read the book, as you start to become more intelligent, culture intelligent, let's call it, then you'll be able to create further and further questions. But to me, really those questions that I put in the book, and it's almost like a checklist. That's what I one of the
Yeah,
reasons I
that's
love
what
it is it's just a checklist of a process. You don't need to be an organizational psychologist to follow it. It's a 100-page book. It's a quick read. So that's
correct.
that's how I'm thinking about it.
I like it. It's almost it's a self-diagnosis, basically, what you're helping with. It's like, hey, if you can't diagnose and get through with this here, we will then come in, step in,
Yeah, I even
and we
have
will.
in March of last year, as I was creating the company, I was like, wait, hold on, I need to do an online course. So I went and in like a
Yeah.
week on my iPhone, did an online course, 6 sessions for, I think I have them now at $250, which is extremely cheap
Uh,
for the topic. So if you don't want to give me a call because I might charge more, but you're serious about this,
yeah.
you can go to my website and do the culture creation model or the culture
Hmm.
driven organization online course. You'll see my face, videos, and all kinds of exercises that will get you hopefully to where you want. And if it's more complicated, like let's say you're a CEO of a 10,000 employee company or 5,000 employee company. Okay, well, even if you go online and you get this, well, you need help. Like you need somebody to
Correct.
go talk to your HR, to finance, to whatever. Okay, that's where I would come in and you'll be able to hire me for workshop.
Hmm.
The beautiful thing about this is anybody in the world, well, almost anybody in the world can afford the 8.99,
Correct. To get this
whatever it
gears
is
going.
for the book, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's all you need. That's the beautiful part that I love about coaching and consulting is the small insights.
Hmm.
Because sometimes it's only one thing somebody needs in order to get the whole engine running. And it could be specifically just in the book. It could be in the worksheet. It could just be in that assessment, or it's a simple conversation where they're like, wait, that podcast actually helped because he mentioned something that I didn't even think about.
You got
And
it.
everything starts to
That's
run.
humility. That's
Yeah.
the opposite of if it ain't broken, don't fix it. That's continuous improvement. That's
Hmm.
your leadership. traits that will lead you to become better and better as time passes. And if you don't have it, I mean, I remember, maybe I'm going off script again, but I remember I did interviews a few years ago. I wanted to leave the company that I was with, and I did some interviews and interviewed the recruiter. Great interviews, went up to the VP of HR. The interview was just fantastic
Hmm.
until the guy asked me a question. And the tone of the interview just,
Ooh.
that question was, yeah, what leadership book are you reading today? And then I wasn't at the time. And I said, oh, I just look at LinkedIn, do podcasts or whatever. And that's how I, snippets here and there. He
Yeah.
never called me. At that point, he almost hung up the phone on me, never called me. Because the
Wow.
idea is this: if I wasn't humble enough to say that I'm, as a leader, need to hone in my skills on a continuous basis through a book or otherwise, and
Hmm.
I'm serious about it, then how humble am I really? And if I'm not that humble, how am I going to listen? How am I going to collaborate? How am I going to lead people and put them before me? How am I going to continuously improve? How am I going to innovate?
Yeah.
And just from that small question, I was like, oh, okay, well, I need to start reading leadership books. And I'm not a
We're
big
going on
reader.
Amazon now.
I'm not a big reader, so at that point I was like one leadership book, at least one per year, and I've been doing it since. So humility is huge for a leader, and unless you decide that you want to go and outside of your comfort zone and buy a book
Hmm.
or buy an online course or call a coach or whatever. I mean, coaching, and you know this because you're a coach. Coaching, it gets you 7 time return on investment. I
Easily.
mean, what else is out there that gives you 7 times return on your investment? But how many
Exactly.
people get coached? Most
Yeah,
likely,
that's true.
extremely little. Again, it's a humility question.
Hmm.
And that is, the ego is one of your biggest issues for
Correct.
culture, is really ego.
Yeah, I remember having conversations like with friends and family, and they were like, "Wait, you have a coach? You're a coach?" I'm like, "Yeah, but doctors have doctors, dentists have dentists. Like, why am I exempt?"
Michael Jordan had like what? Just imagine any sports, right? Well,
Yeah,
because
like,
they're
what do you?
awesome people, it doesn't mean they don't have a coach. Go to the Super Bowl, whatever, the Chiefs, and say, "Oh, you guys are so
Correct.
good. We're gonna cut your coaching out. You guys
Yeah,
should be fine." Like that would
they'd
be
be like,
preposterous. How do we go through life without coaching? I mean,
exactly.
it's an ego thing, anyways. So
Yeah, I agree. You have all these tools and these resources, which one, thank you so much. And guys, please take a look. I think it's very important, especially if you're trying to build something up from the ground, or maybe you already have a company, you have, a group of people you are leading. It's important to get this dialed in so that you can, protect the longevity of those you're serving and making sure you can build something impactful, right? But with all these tools and these resources, I got to talk about the conversation of AI and the different tools that's out there now.
the
So
AI,
with the digital space, right, which is great because you've been able to turn a book into what we call info product and provide it digitally. How have you seen the evolution of providing these tools to your clientele or just to people out there? And how do you see it enhancing or hindering company culture as a whole?
yeah, that's it. It's a really interesting question. And again, I mean, everybody stumbles. Anybody who knows they
Yeah.
think they know or say they know AI, you know it today, you wake up tomorrow and it's brand new. That's this
Hmm.
how scary and fast the changes are coming. Like I think of AI again philosophically. I mean, to even follow the concepts within the book, right? Just
Hmm.
philosophically. I mean, I think of AI as a tool.
Yeah.
It really, that's all what it is. It might significantly enhance your business and it
Hmm.
might significantly deter
Yeah.
your business, even if you're using it the right way. It's a tool.
Hmm.
Define what your philosophies are, go put it in a process. And if your part of your philosophies is we innovate, we continuously improve, and today you're on an abacus and you upgrade it to Excel because that's what you can handle and that's you're continuously improving, guess what?
That's
That's
great.
great. That's great. But if you're a 50,000 employee company who hasn't even talked about AI and don't know what you're doing, well, guess what? Well, that's going to be an issue,
Yeah.
right? Because you have more resources and therefore hopefully more people to be able to put enough time. But at the end, I think of AI not falling in the philosophy side.
Right.
I think of AI falling into the process side.
Yes.
how does AI, any leader has to ask this question, not just because, oh, AI, let me go grab AI and find a way to use it. No, no, no.
Hmm.
Like any other tool, how does that fit within your vision, mission, values, how your processes are designed so that you can go train your people? You can put AI, go pay for it, but if you're not training your people how to
Yeah.
use it, then okay, well, what have you done? You just basically went from philosophies to process and died there because people are not part of it because you're not
Hmm.
training them. So I think AI is simply a tool,
Right.
and you need to see how it fits in your culture in total, make it methodical, take it within philosophies into process, into people, then you'll be able to succeed. And when the next thing, I mean, nobody knew that AI was going to exist. If you asked us
Yeah.
10 years ago, guess what? And 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, with the speed of how things go,
Hmm.
well, there's going to be something new, right?
Hmm.
And it's the same exact question. Are we looking at the process in a vacuum? Or are
Hmm.
we looking at the process within the totality of the model? And that will affect where our culture is. Hopefully, that answers the question.
No, it does. And I was thankful enough. I have a good buddy of mine. He's on the first podcast and he's all about AI. And I say that because he's in a very specific niche that his agency is tailored towards tattoo shops, which is typically a very in-person, interactive, customer centric
Yep.
business. It was that conversation that was like, hey, okay, if we're utilizing all these tools and these, automations and, AI software, how do you balance or go about keeping culture or keeping that human touch point versus systematically like driving the business forward in the new
I
day and
loved his
age?
answer.
Right? And it's like that's what I'm thinking of when it comes to like culture design. It's like, okay, at what point do these tools that we're using for our processes affect our people so much to where we are eliminating the people and that's no longer the fruit of the overall culture
You
or the
got it.
tree, right? So,
And it could hinder and advance. Like his answer, which I loved his answer, was I'm going to introduce AI in the scheduling and people calling the reception type of area. Why? Well, because when people call I mean, when you put an AI with, I think he said Samantha or something, but with
yes,
whatever the administrative voice is, people typically are not going to find out or even notice what the
correct.
difference is, right? So what you've done is you're introducing AI under the philosophy that I want to continuously improve and innovate. But then there's another philosophy or other core value that would say, well, customer is the center of our universe. If our customer doesn't like AI, it's kind of like back in the day when I think it was in the late 90s or mid 90s, maybe early 2000, but the whole notion of the automated calling machine system. I mean, that
Correct.
was a short
Yeah.
form, small, unintelligent form of AI, right?
Yes.
I mean, I can tell you at first it was like, oh, everybody's doing that because we're going to cost cut, we're going to cost cut, we're going to cost cut. But then it
Became
backfired.
overwhelming. Yeah.
It backfired because customers, who should be more important than your innovation, actually, you innovate because of your customers for your
Hmm.
customers. So, what I loved about the story that the person who was on your first podcast, he said, yeah, but that's where we stopped it. Like,
Hmm.
we didn't take it into, well, I could have maybe if I get a machine or whatever, and then the machine would do the stuff for you, and I can now charge $2 versus $20. My customers will be happy. Well, guess what? Nobody's going to come to your shop if there's a
Exactly.
machine that does all of the tattooing for you. So he was able to, in a philosophy manner, decide how far and what type of an AI usage. He's not running away from it because he's shy, but rather he's saying, here's why I'm going to use it specifically because of my core values and my philosophies, and therefore I'm not going to use it here, but I'm going to use it
Hmm.
here. So I loved
Correct.
his answer.
Yeah. From that, then, has there been any adoption as you're growing, right? Because you're still fairly new. Have you decided to adopt some useful tools that's been able to help you to create a bigger impact for what
Yeah.
you're doing specifically with
I'm
people?
yeah. Yeah, because I'm still a small company, not necessarily an excuse, but I'm still a small company and
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure my way out and some things. I mean, I use AI every single day and,
Same.
and how to say things, how to email things, how to even like create, workshops and presentations and speeches and
Correct.
all that stuff, right? I mean, I have to add my personal element into it because it's
Yeah.
it's not a machine doing it and my experiences, but The way currently I use my tools is really mostly my time. I would love one day, and it's funny because in the same podcast that I saw
Mm-hmm.
today that you had, I would love to create some form of a machine, since culture is a manifestation of shared beliefs reflected in common behaviors through, philosophies, through process, through people. I would love to have a machine like the Matrix and then plug something in the CEO's brain that defines the philosophies, put it in your the
Neuralink's coming
machine
around
or
the corner.
process and your ERP, and then plug all your people to it, and zoop, everything comes through, and you're done. You have exact now. How will people behave? Even if you know how to behave, are you going to go behave? That's a whole
Mm-hmm.
conversation. But that would be a great, advancement. But at the end of the day, kind of like what I do is really my time with the executives and
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the team, honing in on their leadership skills and advising them and coaching them on how their process not only should look from a business process. Like, I don't come in and I say, "Oh, I did the study. You should have SAP versus PeopleSoft, or you should have
Yeah.
this type of a strategy or that." No, no, no. What I do is like a sports coach, right? I've done this business wise. I've written this book and have this transformational model. I'm going to challenge you, and together we'll be able to get to whatever it is that you need. So my business is not necessarily reliant that heavily on some new and innovative way of doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I will, right? Like, I'm going through, I just found a company, stumbled upon a company that does a culture assessment tool. You go in and you answer a bunch of questions, and it's great because it's more of a leading indicators versus lagging indicators type of questions, and it will
Mm-hmm.
give you a score of culture. Like, that doesn't, I don't think that exists much out there, right? So
Right.
I'm trying to partner, I'm trying to get as much as I can. I'm, again, a solopreneur, so it's
Yeah.
just me.
Well, that's the beautiful thing. So he's the guy I have before this. As I mentioned, he's big into human and environmental sustainability, and they're still a small team, but they've been able to have a lot of impact. And we had the conversation about the different tools. And the beautiful part is nowadays and age is it's a lot easier as an entrepreneur or someone who's looking to create, especially in the coaching and consulting space, because now you have these tools that gives you the opportunity to be as lean as possible and as efficient as possible to just get things going. Right. So it's like you don't really need a big team, at least in the beginning stages, because you can leverage and lean in on these new tools to help you have the same kind of impact. And of course, eventually, you do bring more
Journey.
people as
It's a
you go.
journey of
Yeah.
maturity, right? Like, if you're looking at a 15-year-old who just started to, read, okay, well, that's problematic, right? But if you're looking at a 2-year-old and you're beating them in chess, okay, well,
Yeah.
that's normal, right? So there's a maturity to any organization, but
Correct.
again, your philosophies, your process, and your people, therefore your culture,
Hmm.
that model works no matter if you're a 1-year-old company or if you're a 100-year-old company. It really doesn't matter, or anything
Hmm.
in between. It's the same model, the same process, which is one of, I think, its transformational aspects.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, right, transformation, where do you see organizations kind of, or the trends going when it comes to cultural
Mm.
design and culture, like cultivating these cultures in these organizations in the next like 5, 10 years?
It's interesting. I think with the great resignation that had taken place, at the COVID
Hmm.
time, I think we've always, like, when you look at Gallup studies on employee engagement, and I don't think there is a Gallup study on necessarily that's published on culture rating, but when you look at employee engagement, which could be a lagging indicator on culture because they kind of go hand in hand, the engagement level of employees in the US, today we're at 31.
Hmm.
Just before pandemic, we were at 36. Backtrack that and go all the way to the year 2000, it was down at like 25 or so, 24. That's still within 30% or less. So for
Yeah.
the past 24 years, we in the country of the US, our employees on average have been engaged with around 30%. Okay. So many things changed. I mean, you had
Right.
like
Well, yeah.
Enron, you had the financial, crisis back in 08, oh
Yeah.
07. You had all kinds of, political stuff. But through all of that, employee engagement is pretty much plus minus 5%.
Hmm.
So I personally think culture wise, almost no matter where you are, no matter what is happening, if your philosophy and your culture is, I'm going to adapt, I'm going to continuously improve. You'll continue to have companies that thrive and their income increases by 7 times more than the average company because their culture is stronger. According to Columbia University and according to Forbes, their revenue is going to be 3 times larger the increase than an average company. If it is 10 years ago, if it is 10 years from now, almost it doesn't really matter because culture, culmination of all the things that we talked about, if you're focused on culture, you are going to thrive. If you are not focused on cultures, you are going to struggle, right? So
Hmm.
the tools are different, but the principles are exactly going to be the same. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
Okay. And with that being said, then, where do you, as you're growing, as you're developing, right? We are still at the very beginning stages of 2025. Where do you
Yeah.
see, Cultivate Culture growing and becoming, or what's the vision for you in
So
the business?
our vision that we put on the website is to cultivate exceptional organizational cultures and exceptional leaders for the good of humanity. Okay, so that's the vision that I will day in and day out when I wake up in the morning, when I go to bed at night, when I am happy, when I'm sad, when whatever it is, as a leader of the sole leader, I guess, the only
Yeah.
person anyways of this company, that's what I'm going to continue. That's what's going to drive me. That's my purpose, right? As an organization. I'd like to see more podcasts, more public speaking so that I can spread the word. I'd like to be able to do more marketing so that people know about the services that we provide.
Hmm.
Currently, of the few customers that I have, and they're being added consistently,
Hmm.
the quality of service when I give them, 5 stars, it's all between 4.5 and 5. On average of like 4.5. The public speaking when I do speeches or when I do coaching, and you can look at LinkedIn and you can see some of the CEOs that I'm coaching and what their feedback is. So the quality of the service, I'm going to continue to make it increase, but it's pretty good right now, especially given my experiences, my passion, etc., etc. So to me, I'd love to get more people that I coach. I'd love to get more companies that I can journey with to help them figure out their culture and where they want to be, really for the good of humanity. Like to me,
Hmm.
I will work almost with any company, no matter what the size is, as long as I agree with your vision, mission.
Yeah.
If you're one that I don't agree with your philosophies, I'm not gonna,
That
no
we
matter
might
how much
have.
you pay me, I'm not gonna, yeah, I'm not going to
Correct.
help you. But absent of that, that's how I'm going to continue is just refine my services and make them continuously improve. Even though it's high rating, I'm going to continue to try to strive for continuous improvement and really just spread the word. Like I think this whole, and I speak to multiple CEOs, the lack of clarity of what culture is and how to fix it.
Yeah.
And again, like the Deloitte study we talked about, a third have the culture they want. I think a third, no matter what you do, they're not going to care. But then that 1/3 is my customer base, right?
Hmm.
That's my archetype. It's that leaders who want good cultures in their organizations, but just simply don't know how and they just need the help.
Yeah.
And these are the ones that I drive for. Now, even the first third, the ones that claim to have good culture, they likely have good budgets anyways for speakers like me to come in and speak
Correct.
to them. And they're going to continuously refine it. That's why they were some of the good culture leaders and
Hmm.
organizations. But that's how I'm thinking about it for me, kind of what the future holds is just,
Yeah.
I'd love to do a TED talk that goes viral at
Oh,
some
that'd be
point.
great.
But yeah, like more public speaking, more conferences, just connecting to more and more companies, refining my own services so that I am able to serve humanity in the
Hmm.
way I was given as a privilege.
That's beautiful. And for that, then, shameless plug, where can people find you? How can people understand a little bit more of how to like work with you, understand these topics, these methodologies? What's the best place to get in contact with you? Let them know.
Yeah, best place you can go on my website, so www.cultivateculture.com or cultivateculturellc.com. So don't forget the LLC.
Don't forget that.
So cultivateculturellc.com or send me an email, Mubaid, Mubaid at cultivateculturellc.com, or just find me on LinkedIn. There aren't many Eyad Mubaieds or Cultivate Culture LLC, so it should be pretty easy to find me. And then just let's connect, let's talk. Of course, buy the book.
Yes.
Read it. Hopefully you'll like it. Buy the book on Amazon. It's the only Cultivate Culture or cultural driven organization book on
Hmm.
Amazon. And that's it. You can buy the online course if you don't want to give me a call and you just want to do your own thing and kind of check it out. You can buy the online course. But yeah, I would love to serve whoever it is, your constituents and your the people you serve. I love to serve. They're the ones who care about culture. And this will be a fantastic journey. Some of the clients that I have now, there's this one specific one. I mean, most of them are still new, so it's going to take a little
Yeah.
bit of time to figure it out. But I mean, I can tell you it's a smaller company teetering on profit loss, profit loss, profit loss, and all of a sudden we started working on cultural leadership development. Their profits went from close to zero to 30%, and then their backlog and their current open jobs went from whatever the number to double to triple to quadruple for the past 3 months.
Hmm.
They've already paid my coaching fee
Very
with the
good.
return on investment for at least 20 years with what these numbers that they got. So I know it works, right? I
Correct.
know it works. I just need to prove it more and more and
Hmm.
even at a larger and larger scale as people are trusting the name and trusting the story.
Yeah, and I believe 100% that it will. I mean, you have the process, you have the systems, you have the experience, and ultimately, I mean, your purpose to just really help change and like build something bigger for humanity is incredible. So
Absolutely.
our biggest thing is called info profits. And with that being said, what's one piece of information you like to leave people with, whether it's on the same topic or anything? What's that one insight or information you'd like to leave people with?
That's you threw that at the end there, Jay, and wasn't planned as much. But what's the one thing? Don't give up, right? As a leader, just have a commitment. Remember that you're there to serve others, not yourself. And as long as you have those philosophies, and maybe read my book, but as long as you have those philosophies, then it just becomes a problem solving exercise. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Martian with, I think it was Matt Damon, but at that, so this is a spoiler alert for whoever haven't seen it.
Fair warning.
At the end of the movie, he says, so students ask him, what is it
Mhm.
like going up to space, right? And he said something to the respect of going up to space, every single thing in space is trying to kill you. Your job as an astronaut is to solve one problem after the other, after the other. And the more problems you solve, the more you're going to come back home and breathe normal air.
Mhm.
Take that in a leadership and organizational analogy. As a leader, I can tell you there are things that are internally to your organization, maybe, but definitely externally to your organization that every single thing out there wants to bankrupt you. Every single thing, everything that is changing, everything that is new, you have competition, every single one of them. As long as you're able to continue to solve your problems every single day and you have the right tools like the culture creation model and a coach, etc., etc., you will continue to survive and even thrive no matter what is happening. But every single thing around you as a leader is trying to make you fail. The question is, can you continue to problem solve, use mentors, use advisors, use new things, continuously improve, have the right philosophies? Then you will definitely succeed, in my opinion. That's the one thing unplanned that that I'll leave with your audience.
Unplanned, but it's genuine and it's true. Appreciate that more than you know. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Eyad Mubaied.
Thank you, Jay.
Awesome.